Thank you all for coming this morning. First of all, I'd like to say thank you all and hello and good morning. Thank you all for coming out this morning. We appreciate the attendance and we're very excited for you all to be here. Special hello to CBC members, guest sponsors, board members, and friends. My name is Sean Harris. I'm the president-elect of the Chicago Building Congress. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And for most of you all that know me, I am not used to staying on script, but I am going to do my best this morning so that we can go ahead and get started, because it would probably wind up being an additional panel discussion up here if I didn't stay on script. So thank you all. I'd also like to thank the staff here at the Union League Club for hosting us in the Crystal Ballroom. We had a smaller room that we were originally supposed to be in, but thanks to you all and your support, we were able to upgrade the room that we are in now because of the attendance that we had here today. So give yourselves a round of applause. So a little bit about the Chicago Building Congress, or typically known as the CBC. It's a unique organization that we represent the entire construction industry. We unite diverse membership by creating informative networking opportunities like this to build meaningful and authentic relationships. The CBC is the only vertically integrated trade organization and association serving Chicago's area, and our active membership celebrates the built environment around us, recognizing the individual contributors throughout our industry, and advocates for future leaders in our industry. We recognize that one of our industry's greatest strengths is its diversity of its people. The CBC IDEA Committee, and that's IDEA, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility. And I can't take credit for that. That was our committee that had such a great idea. Speaking of our committee chair and co-chair, Tony Graham, thank you for your hard work and the committee's hard work on putting this event together today. The IDEA Committee has a mission to promote equal opportunity and participation for all members of the Chicagoland construction region. We believe that fostering an environment that is inclusive, diverse, equitable, and accessible will help contribute to the industry's future success. All right, so before we get to the introduction of the panel, I'd like to acknowledge our CBC members. Again, thank you all for attending, and also our newest members, and I'll read them off. Alliant Insurance Services, Bridgeport Steel Sales, Clutch, Core Construction, ENC Construction and Development, Glengarry Bricksworks Supply Center, Intertech, Langen Engineering, McHugh Concrete, Preston Design and Construction Consulting, Procore, RME, Scout Coal Logistics, Stuart Dean, Vader National Electric, and Valdez Architecture and Engineering. I'd also like to thank our sponsors. We could not hold this type of event without our event sponsors. Our networking sponsors are Bully & Andrews and Smart Concrete Technologies. Our refreshment level sponsor is Fair Graham Engineering and Environmental. Yes, thank you.
Gotta thank the sponsors.
There is a QR code at your table. Feel free to download our digital program and pay special attention to our sponsors. So now, it's time to begin navigating the new economic climate. You've seen bios of our esteemed panel today on the event page website. You can also access them on that same QR code that I mentioned that's on the table. But to provide a brief intro so we can get right to the panel, our moderator is Karen Carminaggi, the Managing Director of Urban Resolve, a development advisory practice focused on commercial real estate, infrastructure, public affairs, and government relationships. Let's give her a quick hand. And our panelists for today: Shahara Byford, owner, founder, and president of Byford Construction. Prior, she has 25 plus years of experience with large general contractors, I think I know who, in the Chicagoland area. Let's give Shahara a round of applause. AJ Patton, founder and CEO of 548 Enterprise. AJ is an accomplished finance, sales, and capital markets expert with more than 15 years of experience in investment banking, endowment management, real estate analysis, and development. And I know so much more. You do so much in this city. We are really, really proud of you, AJ. Let's give him a round of applause. Last but not least, we have Amy Preston, founder and managing principal of Preston Design and Construction Consulting. Amy has 25 years of experience leading architecture, design, and real estate development. So, let's give her a round of applause. So we're going to get started. We will have Q&A after the panel discussion, so please have your questions prepared. And we have the room until 10:30, and let's give them all a round of applause, and let's go ahead and get started. Thank you very much.
All right,
Aaron.
Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? Oh, that worked. Well, first, a huge shout out to Sean as your incoming president. I'm super excited. Full disclosure, Sean saved my bacon on more than one occasion when I ran the Public Building Commission of Chicago for 10 years. There was a little school that we opened, a massive addition in a very small amount of time that he reverse engineered the transformer and his team just pulled it out. So nobody more qualified to engage folks in Chicago, and I'm beyond proud to call him a friend. And a second shout out to Tony. Without her, we would not be here, and she's just a wonderful pleasure to work with. Thank you so much. All right, let's jump into it. We all appreciate, as professionals in our industry, the long arc of a project. The development and our industry necessitates consistency and predictability, whether that be through the financing phase, the conceptualizing, the budgeting, and the actual construction. Many years may take 3 to 5 years, depending on land acquisition, site preparation, utility connections, and what have you. And so as we contemplate the continued elevated interest rates, the stagnation of the capital markets, and ultimately the if we're going to tariff, if we're not going to tariff, what's happening in the executive branch, we find ourselves in a place of decreasing confidence, decreasing predictability. And so this is our new market, this is our new reality, and we have a great panel for you here today that will speak to some of the tools that they are employing to bring a little bit more stability and bring a little bit more predictability to our market so that we can realize construction and ultimately bring housing online, bring places for people to work and economic development online, which is so important to our economy here in Chicago. So with that, I want to turn it over to Amy Preston to tell us a little bit about how these extended tariffs are impacting material sourcing and pricing in your projects.
Thanks, Erin. Am I live? Yes. All right, good. Well, I would say it's no big secret that the construction, the architecture industry has been hit pretty hard since COVID, so we're pretty well prepared when something like this happens. The uncertainty has followed us since then, and so it just introduces a new contingency that we have to follow, and we have to be a little bit more disciplined in the pre-development stages of the project to ensure our clients are prepared, they understand what might or might not come. The tariffs, whether they are or are not, are ultimately going to affect us in some small way. There will be either a supply chain issue, there will be an opportunistic subcontractor who takes advantage of it, and so we're going to experience this, and so the best thing we can do is be prepared. And I think that we understand that, and as owners' representatives, it's the earlier we can communicate that to our clients, the earlier we can manage the design team to afford that in the overall development, the better that we could set the project up for success so that we don't realize this later, we realize it today.
Shahara, as a union carpentry company, are you seeing that affect your material sourcing?
I think everybody in the room is going to say yes, a resounding yes. The thing that Amy mentioned here that I would reiterate is communication is more important than it has ever been. We are on a project currently where there are 200 pages worth of an Excel spreadsheet where we're tracking the tariffs, and it is changing on a daily, sometimes hourly basis. And so I do believe that there are some people who are going to take advantage. That's the world we live in, but I think there's an opportunity to be as proactive as you possibly can, talking to the material suppliers, talking to the subcontractors. I'm a believer that our industry is based on relationships, and I feel that the stronger the relationship you have, the more you can have those honest conversations up front. You can really flag some of those concerns that may or may not come to fruition depending on what happens. But I think communicating upfront is paramount, especially in a time as uncertain as this.
AJ, are you seeing that in your space as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the instability just kills deals, and what you look for is you want to be able to put out a clear horizon or a schedule that says this is what things cost, this is what gets us to closing, and not knowing is what kills deals. And for me personally, I just recently went to the doctor, and I was diagnosed with I'm actually allergic to change orders.
I have an EpiPen in my purse.
Thank you. So, it's something I'm managing on a day-to-day. Appreciate you asking. And so, for me, not knowing, you talked about opportunistic subs, or I think you mentioned opportunistic subs, that's the concern. And so they have a right to say, hey, I don't know what's going to happen in 6 months by the time I get to my trade. And so I'm just going to put in 20% extra to save it. And then that kind of, now the whole deal's upside down, right? And so as I manage my, health, it's important that, we need more market stability.
We'll bring some Benadryl.
Thank you.
I think ultimately that predictability, when you're buying out a job and your trade doesn't come on board, and I want to reiterate what Shahara said, which is that open line of communication ultimately, at least in our experience, has allowed us to have a more transparent process so that if we can show each other where our struggle points are, or if we can show each other what our challenges are and build the trusted advisor relationship with your team, your owner, you'll have a much more successful project. As we prepared for this meeting, we talked a little bit about that tension. Long ago, we were more inclined as an industry to have a design bid build, which was naturally adversarial. But even now with GMPs and negotiated agreements, we're hearing that there's a little bit more tension in the industry as it arises now because of these external pressures. So I thought I'd turn it to the panel. Maybe Amy, you would start about speaking a little bit about the climate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll be honest, I'm not perfect, and neither any of the GCs or architects that we hire or work with. And so just admitting that and knowing that, you have to set the project up with a contingency, right? Clients don't love to hear that, but I can almost guarantee you that my crystal ball would be absolutely correct to say that we're going to get a change order, and we're going to experience something that we didn't expect in the project. So for anyone to believe that that's not going to happen is false, and it's blind. And so we have to be able to sit at the table and deliver that news with confidence and make sure that they hear it. And then when something like this happens, say, this is why we set up those contingencies, because we couldn't guarantee that in 2025 when this came out and now we're buying our project at this time that it wouldn't affect you. But oh, by the way, we have this contingency. We did this for a reason. And so you have to be the expert in the room as the consultant, and you have to advise your client in a way that they can hear it, and they can also adapt with their scope and their design and their entire project pro forma to make sure that you get to the finish line respecting that budget and schedule. So the climate is real, but it's no different than what we experienced with COVID. It's no different than what we experienced with the recession in 08, 09, 010. It's something that's different, and if you manage the process in the same way, you can expect that something like this will happen, and if it doesn't, it might be that they decide to change the design midway through, and you still have that contingency when they do that.
Shahara, are you seeing any tension?
I was going to say, I'd love to chime in here too.
Yeah.
I do think that, being that expert in the room when the job is going, I think there's an opportunity to pull some of those subcontractors in to help tell that story, to make sure everybody really understands the why and what's happening out there. And Erin, to your comment in relationship to the types of projects and how people are getting creative to try to alleviate some of the tension, from the subcontractor standpoint, we have seen some clients really ask us to do more T&M work, or guaranteed max T&M work, so that they're trying to limit that risk, but still trying to move forward and getting that work done. And so again, I think those are opportunities to have conversation, to be upfront, to try to protect yourself, as AJ said, not knowing what things might look like a month or two down the road, but still being able to move forward on, again, some of these smaller jobs that need to happen, or maintenance projects that have to move forward, by trying to manage some of that risk.
So AJ, you and I share a passion for environmental and economic sustainability. So I wanted to shift a little bit to project viability, project funding, and in particular, one shifting landscape around the IRA ITC tax credits at the federal level. There's a funding source and a hopeful growth of our green economy that we are not fully stabilized on and is changing. And I want to get your perspective on how that's changed your pro forma.
Yeah, so we also own an energy company, 540 Energy, that does commercial solar on rooftops, industrial and commercial properties around the region. And essentially, because we live in the state of Illinois, we've got Illinois resources that we can leverage on top of federal tax credits, and allows us to put solar on the roof of industrial properties free of charge and lower utility costs for small businesses by 10-15%. Those federal support dollars are being squeezed currently in this budget, and it makes those deals not pencilable. How that trickles down is that if you've got a deal that's relatively tight, that extra for a developer, that extra $5,000 a month in savings, as you kind of lay out a deal over a 20-year horizon, those are major, major margins that can be valuable of getting a deal across the finish line. And so obviously we're advocating for the Senate to keep protecting those credits. But I want to go back to the tension piece, because I think it's important when there is tension between two parties to appropriately frame the relationship and what the environment was that created it. And I think about the tension our firm has with some contractors right now, and it's hard to not look at post-COVID, all of the rise in construction costs and material costs that happened post-COVID. And then there was so much work that there was very little competition, I would argue, amongst contractors. It was almost people cherry picking which deals they participated in and not. And so, and then in addition to that, high interest rates, which also kills margins. And so now you've got little competition. We just put out a deal a year ago for $35 million, and 2 contractors showed up to bid on it. Now, if I had said that 5-6 years ago, there'd have been a line out the door for people fighting for that deal. 2 contractors showed up with the exact same price. I mean, it's just almost laughable, right? And so we've got some tough environmental things, and obviously in Chicago we even operate in smaller margins because of some of the ancillary things that kind of put pressure on our market. It's important that we think about why that tension is created and why we're even in this kind of box.
Well, I think if you were looking at the horizon during COVID and you decided to diversify your portfolio, as a general contractor, you probably saw the way forward because the commercial private sector downtown market was drying up. And I don't think necessarily that it's fully come back, but I would say because we did the same thing and we diversified and we saw that way out, what I'm experiencing is the opposite, is that I could probably have 5 or 10 GCs show up for a bid. and the competition is fierce. And then it creates this false competition where people come in at like a 1% fee, which you know is a complete ridiculous lie. And so then you have to manage that in terms of your client because they don't want to leave money on the table, but you know that it's going to come back in one way or the other. So you layer that in with the tariffs, you layer that in with the inflation, you layer that in with the interest rates, and you really have to kind of go back to this very basic process and procedure and say, nobody works for free, right? This is not real. We know this is a union town. We can get the labor rates. We know what's going on with material. We can kind of try to subtract that and put a little escalation on that and put some profit on there. And we can see where those, gaps are at. And this is where I go back to your relationship. You really need to find the team that's going to perform for you, the team that you can trust to get your job done, the team that's going to come and say, we don't know what's going to happen. We have to prepare for that and be conservative. So I think that it's a lot of things in our market and volatility that we face on a day-to-day basis, but it's nothing new from my perspective because we've been doing it for a very long time. You just have to kind of go back to that basic procedural format and make sure that you stick to it and don't get over your skis when you have 10 people competing and you think you're going to get somebody who's going to do it for 1%.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there is a lot of competition right now at the subcontractor space, the specialty contractors, as well as at the GCs. We will get invitations from, 4 or 5 general contractors.
Yeah, she turned me down recently. It was
So I do think it is competitive. I think it is working with people you trust. I do think it is having real conversations about what some of those numbers look like. And if you can sit in a room and have that discussion as you're going through some of the scope things, I think it starts to peel that onion back a little bit in terms of people trying to protect themselves and their business, as well as not doing any damage in terms of the overall project still being able to move forward.
Right. And what I do see, though, back to your point, is anything right now, we do work in the not-for-profit sector, too. Anything right now that's government funded, federally funded is really, that's where I'm seeing the biggest volatility. It's a race to get your project done because they don't think they're going to have the money next year. So you take what was already something that was moving slow because it's not for profit, and all of a sudden they want to accelerate it. And that's a really tough position to be in from an owner's rep perspective because the risk at going that fast just to spend the money is even worse than I think the risk of trying to put in a contingency for tariffs. So I think that federal funding is more volatility. That's what I'm seeing in my world.
And let me underscore that because I think I should put a big asterisk on my previous comment. The last couple of deals that we put out to market, with one exception, which the industrial deal, you're right, we did have a lot of competitiveness on it. The multifamily affordable housing deals that had public money in them, most of the contractors ran far away from those deals. And so we had very little competition in that marketplace. And you see kind of the same folks kind of eating up, taking a lot of the air out of those deals. And they know they can put the big margins on those deals because no one else wants to wait 6 months to get paid from the city of Chicago.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I think that's part of what's
I would agree with that. Absolutely. I just think that's where I'm seeing the biggest insecurity is today it's, we have to wait. Tomorrow it's get this thing under construction and start billing for it now because in 2026 that money is gone.
And I think a lot of that depends on the markets, like you were saying. It's interesting because there are a lot of projects out there in the private sector that have been committed, contracts are written, and everything's just kind of on hold, right? Again, that inconsistency and that concern about what's going to happen with the tariffs, what's happening with inflation, makes people, makes banks, makes developers want to just kind of, let's just pause a little bit and see where things really land in 6 months. Some of those jobs are starting to move now, but first quarter, I think we had a really large amount of jobs that were ready to go. Like the start date was set, contracts were out, and just let's pause for a minute and see what happens. So I think it's a lot about the different sectors that you're working in. And so back to your point, if you were able to diversify your business, you have some of those levers that you can pull in terms of where you're seeing some of those bids still coming in versus where things are a little bit more hesitant in terms of moving forward.
I'll underscore that a little bit. In our business, we keep one foot firmly rooted in market products. We just finished 1.6 million square feet in University Park for a large industrial client. But at the same time, we have great passion for and love for our nonprofit and institutional clients. And so being able to lever that, being diversified is something that I think has caused us to survive, if not thrive. And so, we all expect that planned volatility every year with the work that comes through Chicago Public Schools or other, fire drills every summer. But we don't plan necessarily for tariffs or a market crash or things like that. And so part of what I love about Chicago is the consistency of the craziness every summer as we put work aside for various firms. I can't get an asbestos remediation company to return my phone calls in advance of summer, but really want to talk a little bit about market diversification to Shahara's point. Because we are a space in place that has housing shortage, schools that need a lot of work, and a lot of aging infrastructure. So I want to turn it to the panel to speak a little bit about that.
Well, we do a lot of work with education and not-for-profit, and that deferred maintenance is real. And even we're doing a religious institution, we're in pre-development for it right now, and it's just something that's very hard to communicate to the client that half of your budget that you want to spend is going to go to something very unsexy that you probably were not really aware of, right? And also, how do you manage them through that funding process when all you can really say is it's only going to get more expensive if you don't do this now? And so I can't remember a time in history where I'm going to say, just wait 5 years, it'll be cheaper, So I think that is certainly something that we're dealing with, and we've always dealt with it, but now in a more real way where your clients might have to choose just to do the deferred maintenance and forget about the pretty project because that's all they really have the money for, and the longevity of the asset is meaningful in terms of what you're serving in that asset. So that's probably the hardest part that we're dealing with right now is that money's not cheap, it's not getting any cheaper, and our clients are sitting on pools of deferred maintenance, and because of what's going on, they have to make real decisions about scope that are unfortunate.
Yeah, and a lot of that scope is being reduced because of that, right? You said money's not cheap. We are signatory to the Carpenters Union. There was just a recent, June 1, their annual increases. So that's more, escalation that's going to be put into those projects. Materials with the tariffs, people are trying to protect themselves, as we talked about earlier. I do think there are some markets that are still moving really well, and if you're in those markets, you're still active and growing. And so, the data center and mission critical work is moving forward, and I don't think anybody sees that stopping anytime soon. The work at some of the airports and aviation is continuing to move forward, and there are contractors that have been working there for years, and there's very little slowdown with some of that work. You pivot a bit and you look at the multifamily residential, you look at the some of the healthcare. I feel like healthcare is kind of in this middle world right now that it shows some moments of moving forward and some small projects, and people are putting some big projects out there for 2 or 3 years down the road, and so I think they're hedging their bets. Things aren't going to get any cheaper. Let's get this started. We've been waiting for a couple of years. So I think a lot of it is market diversification and making sure that you do have a pulse on what the next couple of years are going to look like and make sure you have a hand in some of those markets.
I was heartened yesterday I testified in front of Finance Committee related to a project that we're working on, and was heartened to hear the Department of Aviation present their capital plan and bonding strategy. This is a city that embraces infrastructure and I think recognizes and appreciates that economic development is really, really important, and obviously our airports and transit and transportation are key there. So I want to emphasize what Shahara was saying. The Department of Aviation and the whole airport program is really, really fantastic. With that, speak to other markets. AJ, I'm interested in your work in the housing market, particularly the risk with site acquisition and what's happening now in terms of incentives and a push towards filling the housing gap that we have.
Yeah, it's been, I think there's kind of two things that we're kind of faced with. One is the administrative process of getting something through the Chicago process, which is
Not for the faint of heart.
no,
Yes.
no, and I think that's a recorded line, so I'm going to be respectful here. I think it faces its real headwinds. I think the mayor's done a great job with the Department of Buildings and, frankly, the Department of Planning. I think there's still a couple more departments he's got to get his hands on that I think he's shown good progress on a couple of fronts. And so the affordable housing is just obnoxiously slow, and we've got to figure out how to unleash that in a more productive manner. And so we've got probably 6 or 7 affordable housing deals that are just permit ready, waiting for the process to kind of allow it to move forward. So we're breaking ground next month on our first industrial development, 360,000 square feet of new industrial in the city. And then market rate multifamily is still is the bedrock of where real estate is. I mean, retail and office are seeing really bad days right now. And so we're really going to stay right down the middle. Workforce housing right here in the city still works. And so we're going to really focus there.
I have a lot of work in the West Loop, having worked at Sterling Bay for as long as I did, and I am so heartened to see the moratorium of residential north of Lake having been lifted. So there continues to be a tremendous amount of market rate housing happening in the West Loop. I mean, one of the few places that has as many cranes as any place else in the nation. So it's very, very heartening. I do know, though, there's a lot of concern around the interest rates and how that's going to move forward. A lot of the deals have the components around affordable housing that we laud and appreciate and want to continue, but there's also a lot of challenge around the interest rates and trying to unlock these deals. So there is a lot of risk in moving the projects forward, and it is one of those times in our market where you see that pendulum swing, where that pendulum is coming back to preparing projects, getting ready until that financing kind of unlocks again. So that is something that I think we're all working towards as a group, as a panel, to see and make sure that we continue to invest in Chicago and make sure that we continue to see that work. I want to talk real quick around some of the Invest Southwest work, AJ, that you've done, because it's really been, I think, such an amazing program for the city of Chicago, and I hope to see it grow.
Yeah, I mean, so, in the previous administration, I think we're calling it Build Back Together now.
Sure.
So it's a rebrand with the new mayor.
All right.
This is a recorded line, just
Okay.
a reminder. And so, no.
Doesn't roll off the tongue as
It
well.
does not. It does not. But I think the thesis still is the same, that what you have is these anchor investments in these kind of strategic corridors around the city, 79th Street, North Avenue, Chicago Avenue, Stony Island. So just having those strategic 89th Street and Commercial. And so we just broke ground on Chicago Avenue in Avers, 60 units, passive house, all electric. There'll be a fast charging station there, first one on the west side, EV fast charging station. So we broke ground 2 Thursdays ago there. We're doing the industrial development on Roosevelt and Costner. That breaks ground next month. 89th and Commercial over in the southeast side in the 10th Ward. We're doing another 50 units there. Those are strategic investments that kind of catalyze around the neighborhood. I get developers call me all the time now saying, I'm buying the lots a block away, and I'm going to do a 2-flat there. I'm going to do 2 or 3 single families there because I know your crane's coming. And I think it was strategic by the Department of Planning to be very thoughtful about where those placements are, just to kind of spark something in neighborhoods that haven't had it. Now, frankly, it takes a great deal of public dollars to get those deals across the finish line. And it takes really a Herculean effort to get all of the administrative, bureaucratic team to understand that these deals need to move through the process quickly. Because as we've kind of alluded to, time kills deals. And your point.
So that's what I was going to ask you, is that are they highly incentivized in order for them to go? And what happens if that pauses because of what's going on? Is that what's stalling your developments? And where do you go from there? And how does a strategic plan like Build Back Better continue to move forward when you're so incentivized by something that gets paused?
Yeah, the truth of the matter is a lot of deals died of natural causes because the process was not prepared to move efficiently yet. And so we have 3 or 4 of those deals that moved through, and there are probably 30 that got announced. We'll be one of 7 that made it through the process, frankly, and we'll have 4 of the 7. And because I think part of that is just like the sheer willpower of fighting through the bureaucratic process, and just frankly putting all the pressure on the city to just get out of its own way. And that's just, I mean, we spent a lot of money on pre-development of our own dollars up front, standing there with a permit saying, it's on you guys. And to your point, which I thought was really poignant, that it's not going to be cheaper 5 years from now.
Right.
And so
Construction never goes down.
it never goes down. And so we've really been pushing the envelope because, and I know there's been kind of a media undertone around the cost of these projects, but they never think about, like, 1, the cost of not doing these projects. 2, that in order to keep something affordable for at least one generation, you're buying the affordability on the front end. And so when you're saying, I'm going to put 50 units here to kind of keep access to affordability in a neighborhood for 20 years, essentially, that's going to come at a significant cost today that will then pay a dividend 10, 15, 17 years from now. And so, yes, it is relatively expensive, but you're buying the affordability. The cost of construction is what it is, but you're buying affordability.
I'd love to riff off of that for just a minute, because as we talk about diversification of markets, I hope that people would also think about diversification in terms of incentives and our reliance on certain incentives, because as many of you know, there are those incentives that are program related. They're either meant to support or elevate or invest in a particular population, or meet or fill a gap in terms of whether it's housing or economic development. But we also have geographically based incentives that certainly are rooted in the same programmatic goals, but it's really important as you put your deal structure together to think about the incentives that are not as volatile as those that may come out of the municipality. At the federal level, we have opportunity zones, we have enterprise zones. These are all based on 10-year census tract data, and that allows you a little bit more relief from that volatility. And it's really important as you put your capital stack together to diversify your funding sources, to diversify your incentive base. And a lot of that does come, if you do that, to your site selection and where you're going to build and how you're going to build. Few people realize the gravitas of the enterprise zone, but I will point to the West Loop, Fulton Market, which is in Enterprise Zone 4, makes all of your construction materials tax exempt, makes the real estate transfer tax waived. It gives you dozens of methodology for saving both initial costs and long-term costs. That conjoined in parallel with the development of the Morgan Street L station, bringing people and transit to a place, is exactly what we should be doing as a city, as a region, in order to proffer the next generation and the next cycle of construction and development. So as we continue to advocate, and I want to turn our panel to advocacy real quick, because I think it's an absolutely critical point, is that we need to continue to advocate for the federal incentives, both the IRA ITC tax credits that support geothermal wells, solar panels, and anything renewable, EV charging stations, for example. All of that we need to continue to advocate for, but we also need to continue to advocate for investment in census tracts that are not as socioeconomically successful as the Loop, investing in Black and brown communities. And so as we continue to advocate, you advocate with your votes, and so I certainly hope you will continue to do that. So I'd love for you guys to speak a little bit about your own advocacy.
So I'll jump in here, and it may not be the angle you were going or not, but I sit on the executive board for an organization called Revolution Workshop, and many of you are familiar with it. Yes, great.
Exactly.
There's some people here today. Yes. And it's been a wonderful organization. They've got
Congrats on your opening last week.
I was just going to say, yes, and it's been so exciting because they just had They are a pre-apprentice organization focused in the west and south suburbs in some underserved communities. And it has been a wonderful journey. And during this downtime, it has been in uncertainty. We took this leap and we went for it to really revitalize and build and prepare the facilities and made sure they were in a better spot so that when things did turn around, we have the resources to be able to train more people and have more people ready from some of these communities. And they had a grand opening, a ribbon cutting last week, and it was wonderful. The mayor was there, but they used some of these programs to really be able to invest in some of the building developments to make sure that they were prepared. And so I think there are opportunities like that people can take advantage of to really make sure that as we navigate the current situation, we're going to get through it just like we always do, that we're really ready to kind of change the face of what construction looks like moving forward and to push that further and faster. So huge congrats to Revolution Workshop in relationship to that.
Please go ahead.
No, I can do an hour on this one. So, for me, as a developer, the question I probably get the most, particularly in the neighborhoods that we invest in, is aldermen saying, I want my job site to look like the neighborhood. And that runs a bit, there's a bit of tension there. We're going to keep staying with that word tension because of some of the historic nature of the makeup of the trades. And so about 5 years ago, we started the 548 Foundation to do workforce training in the neighborhood. So as a development was coming, we're in North Lawndale and we're going to train 25 people in pre-apprentice, and then we're going to advocate any sub that gets on my job site, they have to hire 1 or 2 of the folks. Fast forward now, on Saturday we graduated our 17th cohort, 140 students, we're almost 500 graduates in. We have a joint venture with the Carpenters Union. They agreed to take 100 of our graduates a year. The governor last July, him and I did a press conference. The state gave us $30 million to expand the program from Waukegan to Elgin. We take over 500 students in the region every year to teach them the trades. And then we advocate every quarter for those folks to get into the different union halls. And this is where I have to strategically shout out Sean, and I know his business partner in the corner, Pete. They're one of the first folks sitting there, and we have Industry Day, and all the contractors and union halls come, and we don't do a job fair. They come and interview and make a hire on the spot. We have about an 85% placement rate. Sean's team was the first one there, 8 o'clock sharp, and I think they hired 5 or 6 people, and I'm going to try to get him to 10 soon. But I'm very grateful for strategic partners like that, and we use the leverage of the development company to say, hey, why don't we, how can we strategically partner on the labor portion too? Because if we're going to be on the southeast side, I think it's important those folks get access to these jobs. We got enough people from Schaumburg getting opportunities on Chicago taxpayer dime. It's about time we prioritize our own folks. And that's where I probably should also shout out Tony Grimm, Tony in the corner. With Berglund, those folks have made sure that they've hired local folks from the neighborhood on 89th Street as well. And so we've been very thoughtful about the intersectionality of developing that labor. That's why I have a great deal of respect for Manny and the folks at Revolution Workshop. Developing that labor and making sure they're strategically put on these job sites, but also advocating all the union halls to think more thoughtfully and more intentionally right here about who are and what are their memberships.
I'd personally love to see what's happening at the state level. For those of you familiar with any state funding, frankly, none of our projects these days have a single source of capital funding. Our sources and uses table is like a lasagna. There's 50 different layers of ricotta, and I married an Italian. I'm not Italian, but it's really amazing the amount of cobbling together of funding to do any one project right now. But one of the ones that's very heartening that looks at workforce development in a really significant way, and we're seeing major shifts, is called Illinois Works. So when you take a project funding source from the state of Illinois, 10% of the hours worked must be worked by apprentices, with the goal of bringing people into the unions, because we do have an aging workforce right now. And I think the the tragedy, frankly, of 40, 50 years ago was that a lot of the training halls were moved outside of the city in places that were not accessible to public transportation. And so I applaud those. Many have moved in. There's one in the West Loop that is fantastic, Plummer's Hall that was just built. And there's a lot that's going on to rectify some of the wrongs of the past. But I really think if the city of Chicago and others can embrace this concept of apprenticeship, and the requirement that the funding streams require that apprenticeship investment. It's a critical piece that, rising tides lift all boats. If we can all feed our family, we can all feed our family. And it's an important part of economic development for us. And so what AJ is doing, what the state has done in terms of apprenticeship, and Hire 360, Jay Rowell's group. Really phenomenal folks. If you don't know them, I definitely highly encourage you to continue to work with them. But there's a great group. Have you all worked with AJ's group or with Hire 360 in terms of?
I do, but I think there's a little bit of a gap between what everyone is doing, which is good work, and the general contractors we hire. Because that's where the rubber meets the road for us. Everyone comes in and pitches and says they can do that. They can meet that 10% apprentice. They can meet that 50% city of Chicago residents until they can't, right? Because while you guys are all doing good work to get those people in the trades and live in Chicago, they're having a hard time documenting it and making sure it works. So everything that's getting federally funded right now that we're working on that has that requirement, we're not meeting it. And we're paying a penalty for it. So I think that this needs to, grow a little bit and get to that general contractor pool to teach them how to find those people and make that work.
I've heard your new program. Next program.
Yeah, but I think part of that is I'm going to state the recorded line is killing me today.
It seems so.
I know. So I just think there's that awkward tension with the fact of Manny and Jay. Manny's the Revolution Workshop CEO, and then Jay runs Hire 360, and I've got 548. And those are kind of the big three training programs in the city. There's still that awkward tension between the productivity of what has been accomplished. Those are three groups that probably create 2,000-3,000 trainees every year. And the union, all of the trades stepping up and opening their doors in a real meaningful manner. And I think that's where, to your point, where leadership comes in, not just with the contractors, because at the end of the day, they're signatory. They can only do so much. They have only so much leverage. Yep. That's where a mayor and a governor step in, and they've got to be really honest and face those conversations and have some really awkward conversations about what it looks like to really kind of close that gap.
Absolutely. Well, we're starting to get to our time limitation, and so I want to turn it over to each of the panelists to help us envision the future. I'm envisioning a swan on a lake who's gliding nicely above, but keeping our feet moving under the water to keep us working and solvent. And what advice would you guys give to emerging and current companies to stay afloat through these volatile times? I'll start with you, AJ. Work your ass off.
I think two things pretty consistent advice I always give. I think one is partnerships matter. I feel like there are a lot of folks with the same ideas or similar approaches, but not partnering. And regardless of the line item, whether it's pre-development, design, construction, O&M, I think we need to see more strategic partnerships. Yeah. And then I think the secret sauce to 548, frankly, has been that you'd be surprised how much you can get accomplished without taking the credit. And we don't care who the headliner is as long as things get done. And that's really allowed us to create momentum and create a lot of allies. And so I would just challenge folks to partner with people that are really responsible and qualified, and then don't care who gets the headlines.
I'm going in a completely different direction. I'm just telling everyone to come back to work. Come back to work. Stop pretending you want to work at home, sit on your couch. Amen. Come back to work. Fill our buildings. Make it great again, right? Let's just get back to like a vibrant downtown, vibrant community so that we can support this growth in other neighborhoods. Without that coming back and actually going to work 9 to 5, it's never going to be achievable. So come back to work.
And I'm going to take even a little bit of a different approach. You talked about emerging businesses, and as mentioned earlier, I started my firm a little over 3 years ago now, and being a small business or a growing business in this economy is interesting, I'll say. But I do think that those partnerships matter. I do think that the communication matters. I do believe that the relationships matter. And so really challenging yourselves as firms out there to work with small businesses and new businesses. The reality is it is easier to go with companies who've been around for 50 years and 100 years. That being said, our industry doesn't last long term if you don't have new businesses and new people getting into the trades, new organizations and firms starting. And so being intentional about some of that support, and not because it has to cost more money, not because it's the right thing to do, but just because it's what our industry needs. And I believe that our industry will be better served long term if we are intentional about some of those relationships today.
Wonderful. We're going to give all of you an opportunity to do some Q&A. And so we're going to do a very quick pause and change. I have to go ask for some money at City Hall right now, so I actually have to leave, but I'm going to transition to RJ or Sean to do the Q&A, and we're going to do a quick shout out. As we transition, please give our panelists a big round of applause.
Can we give our moderator a round of applause too? She did a great job today.
Yeah.
Great job.
And
Sean would
Aaron,
like us to take a quick picture before I
yes,
depart.
please, a picture.
All right.
Thank you.
Sure.
We'll begin the Q&A in just a moment once we do a little photo op here. Don't they look great?
Just set the angle so I look 6'5".
Wonderful.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Another round of applause for our panel. Aaron, thank you so much. We are now available for Q&A. I have the microphone. Who has the first question? Heather has a question.
I've actually had the privilege of being on some really cool funded projects, and I usually sub to a sub, and I'm always trying to get the sub to hire out of like CWIT or to hire out of one of those, and I'll find somebody with the right zip code, the right attitude, and I think I found this great person, and I almost always can never get the sub to hire them because of issues that they have had when they pull someone out of the union hall or they pull someone out of anywhere. And I guess my question is, like, how do you overcome that? Because it's their payroll. Like, they're the ones that if the person goes on unemployment or something like that, they're the ones, stuck holding the bill, which is probably a really good question for you.
Yeah.
Because you probably deal with this the most.
It is a challenging question, and I sit in that position quite a bit, whether I am the first tier prime direct to the general contractor or a sub-tier as a second tier. And I go back to the relationships and the conversation, right? That needs to be a conversation up front before that contract is ever signed. It should be a part of the contract and not something hidden, but something that is talked about. With this project, we need to make sure that we are doing community hiring or that we meet these boots on the ground requirements. They can be met, and they shouldn't cost extra money to meet those requirements. That being said, you're balancing a workforce of making sure that you have people, if you're bringing on an apprentice, that you have the appropriate people to try to support that apprentice, to make sure that you can keep that apprentice long term, to make sure that you can truly have the right staff to train that person. So I think it is about an upfront conversation. I've been to several of those outreach events. Sometimes there's benefit in partnering at those outreach events and making sure that that sub-tier, you're not the one going out and finding those people, but they are engaged in the process and out having those conversations so that they can find somebody who meets that criteria, but they have confidence in the work that they're going to be able to do because, you know, they can't afford to have that workers' comp claim on their EMR. So I think it's about the conversation, and I think it's about engaging in that conversation early.
But that's the gap I was speaking about. It's it's only when you experience it that you understand it, right? And so when I was building 320 North Sangamon in the West Loop, and Alderman Burnett had a requirement that we hire from the community, it did cost my project, right? And so you have to be prepared for that and accept it because you want to move that forward, but it's not without its flaws. And we need to make sure that everybody on the team understands that it's a work in progress. And in order for us to build that up, we're going to have to go through those growing pains while we get more people in the labor pool that can perform work and that can be hired and that conversation can be had in a real, honest way.
Yeah, let me push back on that. Not in the thesis, not you directly, but so for one, to Zara's point, obviously relationships matter, and then leadership matters, right? Because if on my deals, those are in the contract, and you know, we pressure the GC to pressure the subs to make sure that we check all those boxes. But let me give you an example of how we approach something like this. We just had an industrial deal go out to bid that we're breaking ground on in a few weeks. And we had a 30% MBE on it and a 10% WBE on it. And we'll probably come in at around almost 40%, because obviously the attrition of the project, so you want to go in higher, blah, blah. And I saw that there was contractors that just knocked it out of the park with their participation while also coming in on budget. But then I kept seeing a couple of like subs that were coming in and saying, it's $1 million, but if you want me to have participation, it's 1.25. So I had my PM pull the name of the company and the CEO, and they're on the list, and they'll never be on a 548 job site, ever. There's participation. The point of partnership is to partner. It is not a change order. It's not an ad serve. If the contract's $1 million and you're going to bring a woman-owned business in, share that contract and then do a great job so that person gets capacity and you don't harm the project. Simple. So I just never understood this concept, but those people will never be on any of our job sites, and not understanding their whole approach to partnership is clearly off, and I think that they're not being good stewards inside this community. Because now I don't get introduced to you, and because now my next deal I want to meet you directly, and maybe I want to partner you so you get 30, 40, 50% of that next deal until you're able to be bankable to do the entire scope of work entirely by yourself. So not only have they done themselves a disservice, they have absolutely misserved you. And so, no, those folks will never be on my job site.
So I think there's two different topics here, right? There's the MBE, WBE business component, and there's the boots on the ground component.
Sure.
Yeah.
Those are two very different entities, and I think they all have their own set of challenges. I do believe that some of them are perceived challenges. And I do believe that there are a lot of strong MBE, WBE firms out there that don't charge a premium to do the work, right? The labor is the labor, the materials are the materials. We all know, we've talked about what the tariffs are and the increase in rates of the labor rates. We're all in a union space here. And so I do believe some people think that it takes more time to manage some of those firms, which I think a lot of people in the room here that I know would push back on that, right? It's about opportunities, it's about conversation and relationship, and talking about some of that up front. On the boots on the ground, I do think that there's some union conversations that still need to shift and move forward to make sure that some of these pre-apprentice organizations have the opportunity and that there's a smooth path through the unions to be successful in the Chicagoland environment.
Yeah. There you go.
I would agree with that. But to your first one on the MBE, WBE, what I would say is kind of back to this larger gap is that the prime has a responsibility, right, to bring up the minority or women or veteran or disabled business so that one day they can be on the same playing field with them. I think what often happens is that there's been a lot of opportunistic ventures out there where the prime is taking somebody on but not doing that work, and then somebody suffers because the person who is the second tier, who should be learning and growing, isn't doing anything, but someone's job is suffering because of that. And I'm coming off a big one that has suffered a lot of money because of a joint venture where this happened. And so that's the gap I'm speaking of, is that if you really want this to work, we need more responsibility on the prime to actually man up and take the responsibility to partner with people and train them while they're there, not just let them sit in a cubicle and mess the job up at someone's cost.
Amen.
Panel, we have another question over on this side.
Thank you. There were a lot of great ideas about dealing with the uncertainty of this climate, establishing contingencies, adapting scope and design to respect the budget. It feels like COVID was sort of a dry run for this environment. I'm wondering, what things have we learned from working through the times during COVID? Is that applicable to now, or is this a different environment? Are there things we've learned from then that we can use now, or are there things that, is that not quite the same, environment?
I think from a design and scope perspective, I will say it's the same, right? I always say the architect is the first on the scene, right? Someone's got an idea and you want someone to visualize that idea for you. And so here this comes, right? This relationship, it gets formed and you start designing stuff. And oftentimes I'm way late in the game and I have to come in and the client says to me, I want to spend X. And I want to say, well, this is why, right? And so I think if you can form a team from the beginning and outline goals, you can be disciplined about design and scope to achieve that vision and the budget. But it's ultimately, it's just kind of a matter of fact. It's not going to change most of the time. That sometimes design gets out there and things happen like COVID or things happen like tariffs. And the only real way to get those costs down is to reduce scope, and ultimately it affects design. And you have to make real prudent decisions, and that's hard for people to do. So I'm not going to say COVID was a dry run, because COVID, I think, what we experienced was that it was a growing market, and people were designing more high-end things, but you couldn't get the labor to support it, and you couldn't get the funding to support it. And so you started to think about big ways on how to achieve the same thing, and scope became a product of it. I think now more than ever, it's just more about getting a group together and having a discussion early on about what all the goals are: design and cost and schedule, and ultimately return, right? Because no one's doing this, like I always say, for free. It's a business. Somebody wants a return on that investment. What is that return? So that if you can understand that and have the full team understand that, including the design team, and they buy in on that, everyone's got a little bit of skin in the game, versus kind of separating everyone into silos and saying, well, you over-designed and you didn't get enough money. Bring them together, make them part of the business case so that they understand how to get it done together.
I will say COVID taught me something, I will just add, because I think that's probably perfectly summarizes it, but I would just add that my lesson from COVID was the true definition of essential. That word kind of emerged from COVID, was what is an essential worker. And I think what I've learned from that was we have inappropriately, and I can't find a better word than inappropriate right now, we've inappropriately outsourced our labor pool to the suburbs. And so now our city cannot operate without a plumber. Our city cannot operate without an electrician. And I challenge people to tell me where are, particularly when we have to use organized labor for every major project. I'll give a great example. An alderman called me and said, I want this project union, and I want it to look like the neighborhood. And I said, Alderwoman, thank you for the call. I would like for you to call your local BA and ask them for every single member of their union that's in your ward, and I will demand they're on my job site. That alderman never called me back.
Right, it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. Now, it keeps going to the thing that we won't talk about in public here, but the truth is that our city can't operate without a plumber, and I think we need to have much stricter residency rules on these projects. We should rethink about how that rebuilds the middle class of our city. It'll make us safer and stronger, but we need to be intentional about it. It's going to force us to have a really tough conversation about our labor pool.
Right here.
I have a question regarding to, obviously, kind of to what you just said, AJ, but there's been a major decline in population in Chicago on the city, south and west side. How has that impacted the MBE, the city of Chicago residency, and what solutions do you have for bringing people back into the west side and south side?
Now, aren't you a Purdue guy?
Yes, I am. But I'm from the west side of Chicago, though.
Boiler up.
Hold on.
Boiler up.
Yeah.
There we go.
I don't know if I'll dignify answering that. no, I just genuinely believe, I just think that if we've learned anything, this may be uncomfortable, but if we've learned anything from the Trump administration, is that there should be no shame in prioritizing us. And I think Chicago needs to start thinking about that. And if tomorrow every job site had 100% residency on it, one, that would terrify the contractors. Sean would probably hate me tomorrow. But in 2 years, our population would go up. In 2 years, the middle class would grow. A lot of people that are in the south suburbs would bring their butt back to the city. A lot of people that are in Northbrook and Oak Brook would find their way to have residency in the city of Chicago and become taxpayers immediately. Revolution Workshops and Hire 360 would become juggernauts in 36 months. And I think that is part of the issue. And also, frankly, I love the operative word you used earlier, which is a perception. There's a perception that labor does not exist in North Lawndale, or that it doesn't exist in South Chicago. It's there. It's just, do we want to go and engage it? And
Sorry.
no, that's it.
I was going to say there's two sides to this, right? That is the vision, right? And that is where I think we want to head, or should be heading, to make sure that we have more representation in the city of Chicago. The reality of today is that it doesn't exist
That's what I was
in the
gonna say.
unions. And we have actually found that some people, you make good money in the trades, right? And so there are some people living in some really challenging neighborhoods today, and they get into the unions and into the trades and make good money and then move to the suburbs. And they no longer have that city of Chicago address. And so I think it is about more than just the requirements on the job. I think that's a step you can take. But I do believe that there is, as we've seen the shift about people moving outside of Chicago and some people's safety concerns about Chicago and things like that, I think this is a city focus across the board to make this work. This isn't one piece of the puzzle. This is all going to have to fall into place to make it sustainable.
Let me push back on that, though.
Please.
Just because I think, going back to the young man's question over here about lesson from COVID and my definition of essential.
Yep.
We have defined teachers essential so much so that every Chicago teacher lives in Chicago. The same with police, the same with fire, the same with people that work in City Hall. Why would we not make that same expectation for a plumber? Because I think there's this thought out there that, if I get plumber money, I get to move to the suburbs. Do they make more than teachers? Do they make more than police? We could argue at the margins, but every police officer lives in the city. And they found their own community inside the city. And so I've always been concerned about this concept that magically, if I get electrician money, I'm going to Schaumburg, I'm going to South Barrington. It's like, no, well, if we had the right parameters in place, like we do with our teachers and our firefighters, then yes, you can be a plumber, make great money, and you can live in Rogers Park and be a part of this system and be a part of this community altogether.
So I agree with that, right? That is the big picture, that all of those components have to happen, because today those teachers have to live and work in the city. Today the trades have the opportunity to live and work anywhere. And so I think that putting some of those new parameters on what working in the city looks like, I think has potential to shift things, but I think you're going to need a lot of pieces to fall into place to make that happen.
I was going to say it's a good idea. It's an ambitious idea. I don't think it's happening in 2 years. Nothing moves that quick in Chicago. Of course. Right? I think it's, I think you're going to
Even
need,
on the recorded line, I think that
I don't disagree. I think that would be awesome if that was mandated. I'd like to see what the outfall of that would be. I think we've got a retiring labor force in the union that's costing in pensions a lot of money that would say bye, and you would have a shortage and you would have a gap. I think it needs to be part of a bigger thought in order for it to come to fruition so that we can support that to make sure that what doesn't suffer is the development and is all of that stuff, so that while you're building that labor pool and you're starting to implement that 100% living in the city, it's moving together. Because it's a great idea. You're right. Why not?
Yeah.
Great. Does anyone else have a question? Raise your hand if so. Yes, right over here.
Can you speak a little more, give more insights on how you're seeing tariff risks being handled, the risk allocation, between owners, contractors, and vendors, heard on communication and partnership, but any other kind of best practices you're seeing out there to handle that?
I think on current projects where we haven't bought yet, where we haven't bought the trades, we haven't bought the packages, we're hedging ourselves with a contingency, right? And we're always used to an escalation contingency, and in the last 5 years, that escalation contingency has been way more than we've ever experienced in my career. But now you're seeing a tariff contingency, and whether that comes to fruition or not, you're just carrying it, right? It just is. If you have these relationships where you can have conversations, you can dive into the details of what you're buying. Are we buying steel? Where is it coming from? What are we anticipating? Are you buying large HVAC units that are coming from overseas? Are we going to experience that on a slow boat, right? And what does that mean for our schedule? So if you want to manage it in the granular stage, you start to have those conversations right when the project starts. If you want to manage it high level, I throw a contingency on it, because something's going to happen, whether it be that material or that lead time, but it will have an effect. It's probably going to be on a smaller scale than it's being made out to be, just because, I would say the uncertainty and will not come to it'll work itself out, and you will experience maybe a 3 to 5%. You just have to be smart about managing that and understanding the subs and letting them, not take advantage of the opportunity to use it as a crutch when something happens in their world or their slowdown. So I think it's a manageable thing. You just have to be smart about it and think about it up front and make sure that the whole team is aware.
When you're talking specifics, I think some of it depends on resources and size of project and things like that. I have seen some firms treat it as COVID, right? Very similar to COVID, where they have a person dedicated to tracking down the tariffs, and they track it, and they have spreadsheets, and they're talking to subcontractors at that granular component. Where is the material coming from? Are they able to get it from a different country? What does that look like? How quickly can they get it? I know some people who have that information and are doing it specifically for that project. I know some people who are talking about it really openly, right? We have resources to track some of this. This is what's happening today. This is what's changing, things like that. It depends on how detailed you want to dive into it.
Very good. How about one more question for our panel? Anyone else with a question? I think what I may do is turn it back over to our president-elect, Sean Harris.
Fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you all coming here today. I do have one quick question personally. So this organization is always very committed and excited to have developers and owners reps come and have a conversation with us, right? So tell us how best to build relationships with you all as owners reps, developers in the market. Our general contractors, they have that relationship with you. typically the trade contractor's a little bit distant, but how best to build relationships with our developers and owners reps in the market?
Call me for coffee.
Done.
I will have a coffee with you. Just from even younger in my career, I loved knowing the trades. It makes you have a little bit more street cred on your projects when you can walk in and the trades know who you are, right? I want to know the people who are working on my job so that they feel like they have a relationship with me and they want to do good on my projects. And in return, I want to treat you fairly. I want to pay fair wages. I want to pay people to get profit. I want to make sure that nobody loses money on my job. And the best way to do that is to know you, right? And so call me for coffee.
Yeah, I would support that. I think the big thing is to meet folks when the best time for us specifically is when we're not putting stuff out to bid, when it's just there's construction going on, we're underwriting our future deals. That's a great time to meet new architects, new contractors and so forth. And then particularly for us, like, we are pretty transparent that we care a lot about sustainability and inclusivity and building the next generation of contractors and so forth. So having ideas around that coming into the conversation is really helpful. But also, I am a capitalist, so I have zero interest in paying a premium to be a friend. You know, you've got to fit inside the capital stack just like everybody else. And so, you know, all the fancy language I just said for the last hour matters not if my deal doesn't underwrite. And so I care. It's my number one. My boss is the bank. That's who I report to. And so if my deal doesn't pencil, all this is for naught. And so as long as you have competitive pricing and you can be sustainable and be thoughtful about who you partner with, I want to talk to everybody. I want to have coffee with everybody in the city.
Shahira, how are you building relationships?
I mean, I think it is that, right? It's reaching out, it's having the conversations. I do believe it's the partnerships. It's everybody is, what do they say, 6 degrees of separation, right? And so utilizing your network to enhance your network. And so as we come to a situation like this, like Amy and I's kids played baseball together. And I don't know that we ever had the conversation that we're in the same industry until we got paired up for this panel. So I think it's about having conversations with people in your everyday lives and connecting through LinkedIn or reaching out and showing up to the events that are out there and putting yourself out there to have the coffee and to make the relationship. And it may not go anywhere, but I think having those partnerships when you are like-minded in a similar industry working in the Chicagoland area, there are so many similarities. And just like the conversation today, we have the opportunity to learn so much from each other. So I think Erin said it before she left, right? All boats rise. Yeah. And I think the more we talk about things, the more opportunities everybody has.
Well, the only way for me to know how to communicate to my GCs, to communicate to the subs, is for me to know what your pain points are and what you're experiencing. And so I view it as knowledge, right? Like, the smarter I am about what everybody's doing on my job, the better I am at advising my client on who to hire, when to hire, how to do that. So I'm open. I'm a capitalist too, and I know if it doesn't pencil, it doesn't go, but I'm open to making friends because I like to know what you're all doing so that I can be smarter.
My new best friends. All right. AJ's number is 312-508-2300.
Close enough.
So I want to give another thank you to the CBC Idea Committee for putting on today's program. Tony, thank you so much for leading up this effort. And we are looking to put together another event like this, but even at a larger scale. We're going to wind up inviting BCO, Revolution Workshop, CWIT, HACIA, PWC, to actually have a larger conversation, a larger networking event where we can all spend some time and build those authentic relationships like we're doing here today. So Thank you all for coming. Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't also thank Jan Bohonik, our current president. She's done a fantastic job over the last 2 years of building a strong foundation and diverse organization here at the CBC, and she's one of the reasons why I'm actually sitting here today. So with that, thank you all for being here today, and you all have a great day and enjoy the rest of your day.